What's going on, guys? It is Fox98 here. Welcome back to a brand new video and another episode of the F1 debate. Today, we're going to be talking about the F1 2023 Austrian Grand Prix. And first things first, I want to take us back to the previous race at, I believe it was the Canadian Grand Prix, if I get my memory correct. And I just want to say a massive thank you. Thank you so much for all the support on that video. I believe over 300 people have watched that video now, and it's just been really well supported. And yeah, I mean, it's even done better than all my F1 23 game videos, which is mad. You would have thought it'd be the complete flip. And that's what it's normally been. But you guys really just seem to just show a lot of support for that. So I don't know if we'll ever achieve that margin again, but thank you. I really appreciate it. And I'm glad that you enjoyed me just talking about F1, because that's kind of what I want to do, is just bring my personal experience of real life F1 into the channel. But today, let's talk about the Austrian Grand Prix then. I'm going to split this up into a couple of segments in terms of how we're going to rock this one. So I'm going to talk about the two qualifyings first, then I'll talk about the races, and then we'll talk about things. But obviously, let's get straight into the Austrian Grand Prix, or as my mate Sam put it, the F1 2023 Black and White Flag GP sponsored by Track Limits. So let's get straight into it then and talk about the two qualifying sessions. And they were both rather interesting, with obviously the normal qualifying on the Friday just being kind of your bog standard qualifying, but nice and close, and a couple of surprises here and there as well, with the likes of Sergio Perez and George Russell. Russell not being able to get through, mostly because he just didn't have the pace for it, and Perez because he exceeded track limits. I'm going to be saying that word a lot in this video, and just pretty much have seen everywhere, and even to yourselves, had multiple lap times deleted and was unable to get through. Of course, it was a very close qualifying shootout between Max Verstappen and the upgraded Ferrari of Charles Leclerc, and in which Charles Leclerc just took a little bit too much out of his car, especially in the second to last corner, which just set him up wrongly for the final corner, and that's where he lost the time, and Verstappen took pole by half a tenth. And then in the sprint shootout, it was a lot more entertaining because we had the wet weather conditions, but there's still an issue with sprint shootout, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But it was a great shootout. Again, this time we had all the drivers trying to get laps in Q1 with the inters then turning dry. Lewis Hamilton getting knocked out in Q1, then Russell having an issue with his hydraulics, so he was out in Q2. Leclerc and Perez were both nearly out in Q1, and then we got into Q3, or SQ3 should we say, and obviously we had yet another head-to-head. But a couple of issues. Now, what they mentioned is that in SQ1 and SQ2, you have to be on the medium compound tyres, and then for SQ3, it's the soft tyres. However, because it was raining, it meant that you could use whatever tyre, or it was declared wet. You could use whatever tyres you wanted. And to me, that's just confusing and doesn't really make any sense, and kind of kills the whole vibe of what you're trying to achieve. Like, if the drivers have to use the medium tyres if it's dry, just make them use the medium tyres when it's dry. Just because it's declared wet, I don't understand why it just means then they can go and break the rules and just go on whatever tyre they want. I just don't understand why we're just trying to make that rule. You know, like, why are we saying, right, you've got to be on the soft tyres for X amount of time, then you have to be on the mediums or whatever. Like, if you're going to do it, just be consistent about it and just be like, right, no, if you're on the inters, that's fine. But if you think it's good enough for dries, then you go on to the mediums if you're in SQ1. You go on to the mediums if you're in SQ2, and then you go on the softs then if you're in SQ3. And then the final thing I wanted to mention about this is, yes, of course, when we're doing a sprint qualifying format, you do a lot less running in terms of practice. So normally what we tend to see in practice is in FP1, they tend to use 2 to possibly 3 sets of tyres, depending on what type of program they're running. So they would have like the hard or the medium tyres for the first little stint. Then they would rock out on a set of the soft tyres for the next stint, and they may just keep those soft tyres and do a bit of long runs on those after doing some performance runs, or they'll do a double soft and use 3 sets. In FP2, it's the same thing. They use 2 sets of tyres, so they'll just do a couple of banker laps on their medium tyres or hards, whichever one they use. Then they'll use their softs for a performance run, and then they'll go on, and you get the format anyway. But it just seems that for qualifying in particular, there isn't enough tyres to go around for everybody. Everyone's on used tyres unless you're Verstappen that's got all brand new sets. And I think this is where I don't like it, because say, for example, you're Lewis Hamilton. Let's just say, for example, he gets knocked out in Q1, right? And somebody like, let's just take a rival of theirs. So Lando Norris in this instance, right? He got through to Q3, right, in normal qualifying. We moved to the sprint qualifying then, and all of a sudden, we're getting into Q2. So Hamilton and Norris get through. But all of a sudden now, Hamilton's got has got basically 2-3 sets of soft tyres that are brand new. Norris, let's just say he had to use all his tyres to get through. He's got nothing. So automatically you're just going to go, yep, well, Hamilton's going to get pole then. Because, sorry, not pole, you know what I mean. Hamilton's going to out-qualify Norris because Norris doesn't have the tyres to utilise it. And I just think the purpose, we saw a bit more of why this was wrong because of the declared wet situation. Because they said that you have to use the mediums in SQ1 and SQ2 and then the softs in Q3. Even if we got through to Q3, those that have used a set of soft tyres, they can't really do anything. And it's just a little bit silly. Like, I think if you get through into SQ3, you should just be granted a set of soft tyres. You can't use them for the race. You get one run on them, like in normal qualifying. You know, in normal qualifying, if you make it to Q3, you get given a set of soft tyres that you can use, a brand new set of soft tyres that you can use for one run in that session. Why not just do the same for SQ3 and just say, look, well done, you made it into Q3, you're still using up a lot of tyres here on hot qualifying laps, here's a set of soft tyres. It just makes things simple. Like, in the first round, it was you had to have a brand new set of tyres, you couldn't use soft, which was the dumbest rule ever. Now it's been rectified. Then we go into this session and it's, well, everyone's using tyres, everyone's qualifying but on the used tyres only. So if you were able to save a set of tyres, A, if you were either knocked out early and you shouldn't have been, or B, you have the fastest car by about 20 light years, you're fine. And that to me was a little bit odd. So yeah, there's a little bit of a rant there, but that's basically the two qualifying sessions covered. Now, we go on to the Austrian Grand Prix sprint, and it was a fascinating sprint, a brilliant one actually, at that. I thoroughly enjoyed it, which is very rare for me to enjoy a sprint race, but I really enjoyed it. Do I think it is the best sprint race that we've had? That's a tough question actually, to nearly bite that down, because I absolutely loved the sprint race in Brazil in 2022, and I just feel like Brazil 22 had just a tiny bit more than what Austria did. Now, don't get me wrong, Austria was a super close second in terms of being the best sprint. Why I believe Brazil was probably, in my personal opinion, again, let me know in the comments if you thought, it was the best sprint ever. Of course, like I said, or as I said multiple times, the comments section is your oyster. I'm producing this video and expressing my opinions. The comment section is there for you to put your opinions in, and you can happily disagree with mine, and you can happily agree with mine. Just be respectful to everyone's opinions. Now that's out of the way. The reason I thought that Brazil 22 was just a tiny bit better was because the battles for the lead, more importantly. We had Russell with about 3-4 laps where he was going for it versus Max Verstappen, which was great to see. Then we saw Carlos having a fight with Verstappen. Then we saw Hamilton having a fight with Verstappen. Then we saw Hamilton trying to attack Carlos. We saw Magnussen starting on pole, which was just random and wild. And we saw drivers pushing up the order, like Perez needed to get back up the order because he was a little bit further down. Same with Charles Leclerc. I'm pretty sure Leclerc was out of position in that Grand Prix. But everyone was all mixed up because of the wet quali. And it was slightly less mixed up in Austria. And we would have had potentially a cracking sprint had Perez maintained his position, but he couldn't. And speaking of that, let's get to the Red Bull drama, shall we? What do I think of all the drama? I think Verstappen was a little bit over-aggressive on Perez, but I think Perez was also a little bit wrong-sighted by his own awareness. How do I judge it? Perez didn't quite get the better start, I thought, than Verstappen, but the second phase got through. As he was pushed to the pit wall and on the white line, it's a lot wetter on that side, so his tyres will inevitably cool off a little bit, and he obviously went deep into T1. I understand what he's doing. He doesn't want Verstappen to get that run into turn 2, but I feel like Perez could have probably covered that a little bit more aggressively without losing the time he did. And of course, Max going on the grass wasn't great. On the run up towards turn 3, I genuinely didn't think Verstappen would get through. It's almost like Perez was... I don't know what Perez was doing actually in turn 3. Like, all he needed to do was just go to the middle of the track, and if Max went one way or the other way, Perez was already in the middle of the track, so could defend one way or the other way. And he just didn't seem to do that. He literally allowed Verstappen to just go up the inside and forced him wide. Now, a lot of ultras out there, you know, classic Max, silly, aggressive, leaving no space, blah, blah, blah. I think the one down towards turn 4 was borderline on the limit. The one towards turn 3 was absolutely fine in my opinion. Perez didn't even bother to cover it off, like I said. He was just in the middle of the circuit, and then Max was just like, well, I think Max more or less was kind of surprised that he was like, wow, he's there. And I think because he did lock up into turn 3, I know Perez was actually more annoyed about the turn 3 incident than that one, because obviously Perez had to go off the track. I think Max was more of a case of, he was surprised that Perez left the door so far open that he wanted to get there a little bit quicker to make sure that Perez didn't quickly just slam that off and realise he was there. I think that's the whole purpose of it. I thought the run down to turn 4 was a little bit more borderline, should we say, of forcing a driver right to the edge of the circuit. And another one of those situations where you either back out or you crash. That's Verstappen style, really. It's the same as what Ayrton Senna did. He was the same. You either go alongside me and crash, or you back out and I'm through. That's basically how it is. And of course it allowed Hulkenberg to get through. There was loads of battles further back, which was great to see. And it didn't feel like overtaking was that much of a problem, even in the wet conditions with no DRS. It felt quite balanced in my opinion. There was a great fight with Hamilton and Magnussen. I thoroughly enjoyed that battle. Hulkenberg eventually, the Haas tyre wear came into play and he dropped down the order. And then we had the pit stops. And that sort of spiced things up a bit. Everyone else, it was sort of like, it was great because it was, do you want to stay out on your inters and you know that the dry tyres are faster, or do you want to pit for dries, but you've only got like 6 or 7 laps to make this work? And what this sprint did, in my opinion, which it's a benchmark now to move forwards, is add strategy into a sprint. It just works. Like, it was brilliant. Like, and I would say in my opinion, I'd say don't do mandatory pit stops, but then everyone would not do a mandatory pit stop. So I would put it out there. You've got to make a pit stop because it just spiced things up. And it was like, well, you know, some drivers opted to stay out, some didn't stay out, and then, you know, some pitted. Russell in particular benefited massively from it. Hamilton also benefited a bit as well because he managed to get through Leclerc. And it was just great. It was awesome. And it made sense to do that. But I don't know whether they can implement that in the future. I think they should. A lot of people have been saying whether they just do like, what's it called? Sprint-specific tyres, basically. I don't agree with that. I would literally just say, like, you can only use the softest tyre compounds available or something. Because, let's be real, in the main race, are they ever using the softest tyres available? No. Apart from, well, like Monaco, they use them. I think no, they didn't use them in Monaco. So yeah, just make them use the softest tyres and go, there you go, slap on a set of soft tyres. Are you going to get those to the end? No, you've got to make a pit stop though. Because it will force them, by saying you have to use the softest tyres, and then by forcing them to do a mandatory pit stop, you're effectively telling them, yes, you can manage your tyres, but you have to stop, and it's on the same set of tyres. So you'll still get drivers pushing hard, but a little bit of management will have to go on in there. But say for a 24-lap stint, can they do 12 laps on the softs? Of course they can. It's not that difficult. Well, I say it's not that difficult. I'm not a driver. You know, I've never driven a Formula 1 car. Why would I know? But I think it would make more sense to do it. And I think it'd be great for that to happen. And moving forward, it's something that I want to see. Next up then, we go to the main event itself. The F1 2023 Black and White Flag Grand Prix, sponsored by Track Limits. And that was basically what the race was. Unfortunately, it was a good race that was heavily ruined by Track Limits. And I'm not saying that this in a bad way. Now, we're going to get on to what I think of the Track Limits situation in a minute, because unfortunately, as much as I want to talk about the race itself, I can't really talk about it because Track Limits just got in the way. And it just got to a point where I was too busy getting confused and just too busy noticing and being invested in the whole, this person's got a track limit, this person's got a track limit, this person's got a track limit, because all of the attention was diverted away from the race to Hamilton's got a penalty, Sainz, you've got a penalty, Ocon's got a penalty, Magnussen's got a penalty, you know, and it was just silly. Like, it's so clumsy, and for some reason, I don't know why, it's an Austria thing. We saw it last year with track limits being a problem. Nowhere else on the F1 calendar do we have track limit issues like we do in Austria. Do I think that what they were doing was the correct thing? 100%. But I feel like that the sensors or whatever they were using need to be implemented in different places. Like, you know, if you're getting a track limit violation, let's say for example, exit of turn 4, right? You're going down you're running downhill towards turn 4, you turn right, and then on the exit, you've got the white line, you've got the curb, you've got a tiny bit of runoff, and I'm talking like a minuscule amount, where it's the point, like if you put your car right on the edge of that, you're probably a couple of inches over the white line. Those type of instances, for me, I don't believe that you should be getting a track limit violation for that. I genuinely don't. I think it's clumsy because the gravel's already been moved closer in anyway. And, you know, I know what people say. Well, why don't you just get a gravel track that just goes right next to the curb? Well, I think there's a couple of things that you need to mention here. And as everyone says, gravel is the thing. No, because we can't just keep talking about track limits and fixing track-specific issues for just Formula One. We need to remember that there are other sports categories that race at these circuits. This is not an exclusive Formula One circuit. And that's something to bear in mind. MotoGP races here. And obviously it's dangerous to have gravel because, you know, you have a bike that slides off and all of a sudden it's going to ditch itself into the gravel and it's just going to flip. And it could easily flip over a fence. That's a safety hazard. You know, same with the drivers. They could be ditching themselves in the gravel and then they could be jumping and flipping in gravel. You know, gravel, as much as it may work for track limits in Formula One, like I said, it could easily kill a spectator in MotoGP. So it's about balancing out what's the right things to do and what's not the right things to do in those certain situations, which is why I feel like in those circumstances, like turn 4, like I said, they're fine. Like, if you need to introduce those type of curbs which break the floors and break this stuff, fine, because they're not going to go out there. And you know, places like turn 4, there's already gravel that's pushed all the way to the circuit. So yeah, they may be an inch wide, but they're using that element of the track. That's fine, leave them to there. In terms of what you do with turns 9 and 10, there's not an awful amount that you can do. But I think what annoys me the most is that track limits were being deemed even if you were losing time. But again, it's such a hard thing to police because what is a determination of you losing time? Like, how do you know if you've lost time through there? How do you know that you've gained time through there? It's just going to ping anyway. But I think the problem is because they've been so lenient on track limits, the fact that it just got pinged so many times just caught everybody out. And I think if you ran that race again, you'd see a lot less, maybe a couple more penalties, but a lot less. I think it was just really messy. I think the way that they're going about it and saying that the white line defines the circuit is fine. That's good because, well, guess what? That's where the tarmac is, funnily enough. But the way that they policed it, I think it caught everybody off guard. And I think there's there's ways that they need to try and find to develop this. Some areas you can use gravel, but some areas you can't, and you've got to be a bit more smarter with it. Obviously, we don't want things like rigid sausage curves because obviously we know they launch cars. But I think the sausage curbs, like the one that's, I'm pretty sure there is one sausage curb actually in Austria. Exit of turn 1 exit and turn 3 exit. Just use those because if you get launched on those, well, it's quite clear that you've gone straight on, really, haven't you? There's no real amazing way to police it. I think the way they did it was fine, but it was a little bit frustrating that we had to wait 7 or 8 laps. But the problem is you've got everybody doing it with 1,200 track limit violations. I'd be in the same boat. So now that we've gone through my rant of track limits, well, not necessarily a rant, but just an idea of how it could be improved in the future, now I want to talk about, obviously, the race itself. Now, who were the standouts, who were the weakest, and who were the best? Let's get straight into it. Well, we know who was the best, Red Bull, considering Verstappen won by pitting an extra time for a set of tyres, weaving on a straight while Leclerc is less than 4 seconds behind, and then bolting it for a fastest lap to get the point. So yeah, Verstappen and Red Bull were by far the best. Obviously, Perez was heavily compromised by his run in Q2. Was it Q2? Yeah, Q2. Had he not had an issue in Q2, it was a Red Bull 1-2 in quali. It would have been a Red Bull 1-2 in the sprint, which it was, and then a Red Bull 1-2 in the race. Absolutely dominant from Red Bull. Can they be beaten? Well, it's a bit awkward that I put out the video last time around about saying how Red Bull won't be winning races much longer. And they've gone and smashed everyone in Austria. But I can't really back out from the statement now, but I think they'll be beaten, but I maybe a bit longer than what I initially thought, okay? Painful. Anyway, next up, Ferrari. Fantastic weekend for Ferrari. Easily, for me, their strongest weekend of the season. Charles Leclerc put in a great performance. He was actually really poor on the first stint. Carlos Sainz was much quicker. Why they didn't just allow them to swap and see if he could at least try and match the pace with Verstappen, I'm not sure. Of course, Sainz then got heavily compromised by the virtual safety car as well. Now, of course, the first time that they went around, of course, yes, the VSC had passed. The VSC came out as they passed the pit lane. So, of course, that's fine. They couldn't come in. But I'm pretty sure they double stacked, incorrectly when they could have done a lot more to not allow Sainz to get held up in the pits. Unfortunately, obviously, he did. And, of course, Sainz then obviously got that 5-second time penalty for exceeding track limits, which he had to take at his stop, and that obviously compromised him. For Charles Leclerc's sake, he managed to break the streak of, I think it was 246 laps consecutively led by Max Verstappen, and that was probably the happiest moment I had in the Grand Prix, was just not seeing a Red Bull leading a Grand Prix. It's been so long, because even though Verstappen's consecutive streak has been that, of course, Miami, Perez was leading it virtually the whole time. I think he might have led literally the whole time as well. So I'm pretty sure Perez was leading it the whole time. I think the race before that was Australia, and that would have been lap 1 to about lap 10 that Mercedes-Benz were in the lead. And apart from that then, it's just been Red Bull leading. And same in Jeddah, Alonso led for a lap, and then the Red Bull won the whole way, and then Red Bull led every single lap in that one. So I was just happy to just not see Red Bull out front for all I cared, but it is what it is. Leclerc obviously sitting duck then to Verstappen. The upgrades working very, very nicely for them. Do I think that this is going to propel Ferrari into that fight in second in the championship for the constructors? Not yet. We need to see how the upgrades work heading into Silverstone. Of course, I believe they are bringing a few more bits, but their big bulk of the upgrade was here at Austria. But it's a very unique circuit, Austria. There are quite a few high-speed corners in the middle and the final sector. There's also a lot of slow-speed corners, obviously, where you need good traction. Ferrari's been typically quite good at that. But they were able to, what I noticed was run the car lower without it porpoising, which was very key for them. So maybe they have genuinely unlocked something and could start propelling themselves into a better direction. So let's talk about the two that I just mentioned then, Aston Martin and Mercedes. Both of them having one of their worst weekends, or for Aston Martin, it was for Aston Martin and Mercedes, it was easily their worst weekend of the season so far. Both of them were nowhere near on the pace this weekend. Mercedes, I felt, had quite a bit of pace in the sprints. They felt quite competitive, but again, they were kind of still fighting in the midfield. And yeah, granted, when George was on the softs, he was the fastest, but again, loads of people, the Ferraris, apart from Leclerc, the Ferraris didn't really pit for the Inters. Red Bull didn't pit for them. For the softs. Red Bull didn't pit for them. So it was a little bit difficult to say that. But yeah, for Aston Martin's sake, they really had a poor weekend. For Hamilton and for Russell, awful weekend. Talking first with Aston Martin, they just genuinely didn't have the pace from the get-go. I couldn't really tell why. I guess if you're an Aston Martin fan and you follow them heavily, you may have some information that I don't. I have some information on Mercedes, which I'll bring in a minute. But they just felt off the pace, and it didn't look like there was a particular area where they were genuinely just extremely slow. Like with Mercedes, it was a complete flip, because in the first sector, Mercedes was probably the quickest, actually. It went purple with Hamilton a lot through sector 1. And of course, it is only one corner and then a long straight. You'd expect Red Bull to be the fastest there, but of course, Red Bull's main area of dominance, which is their straight line speed, was kind of actually pegged back a little bit in Austria because, of course, of the elevation. I think it's the third highest circuit above from sea level on the calendar, behind Brazil and Mexico. I could be wrong on that. You can correct me. And if that's the case, well then, if you are higher up in terms of elevation, well, there's less air so less air resistance results in less drag, more downforce. So that's kind of where I think Red Bull may have been pegged back a little bit, because Hamilton was quickest through there, but then through sectors 2 and 3, that Mercedes was awful, really, really bad in those two sectors in particular. What I did to have a look at, I saw a couple of sources out there. They basically said what went wrong with Mercedes is there was something to do with the front wing flaps. However they adjusted them for their setup, it worked in the hot conditions on the Friday morning, And of course, it worked well for them in the qualifying because it was still quite warm then, even though it was obviously later in the day. Heading into the race, though, or the sprint and the race, when you've got colder, wetter, cloudy conditions, it really didn't work for them. So maybe if it was a hot weekend, Mercedes definitely could have had something up their sleeve. But whatever they did, it worked in practice. But then when the conditions changed, they weren't able to understand their setup. I think for Aston and Mercedes, the sprint weekend really hurt them, just not having the extra sessions to fine-tune their setups, should we say. And if, of course, if the Mercedes thing is a front wing problem, there are reports that they are looking to build a completely brand new front wing for, I believe, the Belgium Grand Prix. They're not going to bring that for Silverstone. The rumours for Silverstone is side pod adjustments to redevelop them a bit more. The engine cover to be changed, because obviously right now, as much as the engine cover's got those cute and fancy gullies, they need to try and find a way to just make that engine cover feel a bit more cosmetic to the car, because the whole car, the chassis of it, is for the zero pod concept. And you can just tell, like, I mean, that massive gully that they have, then they've just got that straight flat down, and then the bulk of the side pod, that piece in the middle, it doesn't allow for greater airflow through it. It might do. Maybe it'll be a tradition. If it is, I don't know, they just look a bit ugly. But apparently it's the engine cover, and they're also making work to the floor. Of course, Ferrari did work to the floor this weekend. The Venturi entrances at the front, they were adjusted, mostly the front and the rear piece of the floor, maybe in the midsection of the floor. So they got some upgrades. They got a big upgrade actually coming for Silverstone. And then for the Belgian Grand Prix, the rumour is a brand new rear wing and a brand new front wing. Now, the front wing will be more important because that obviously dictates the airflow from the front of the car to the whole of the car. So if they can get that working, it might help them in the second half of the season. Aston Martin, I think they're also bringing upgrades as well. A team that did bring upgrades and smashed it was McLaren. Fair play to them. Lando Norris, the only driver to be running the upgrades this weekend, and he was absolutely fantastic. Now, I'm going to be taking this race as a pinch of salt for McLaren. And if you're a McLaren fan, don't shoot me. I think the reason I'm taking McLaren with a pinch of salt is because Lando Norris' best track is Austria. He's always performed well there. 2019, 20, 21, he was getting his podiums. I'm sure he got his first ever front row lockout in 2021 there. He's just a brilliant driver at the Red Bull Ring. Something suits him with that circuit. So let me see what he goes like in Silverstone and in Hungary and Belgium, the final three races of the first half of the season, before I sort of judge him for these new upgrades. Of course, Piastri will get them at the British Grand Prix as well. And of course, I think they're bringing a few more bits on there. But McLaren, if these are how their performance is going to stand, have catapulted themselves to the fifth fastest team and leapfrogged Alpine. And of the Alpine, it's quite funny actually, whilst I was, just before I was recording this podcast, video, episode, whatever, let's just say it's a podcast, fine, let's do that. Whilst I was recording this, or before I was doing so, I saw a team radio message come out, and it was Ocon after the Austrian Grand Prix, and it was, P12 mixed Grand Prix, not quite the race we were looking for, lots of track, grid time penalties out there. And Ocon came back, yeah, not for us though. And then his team engineer came back and said, yeah, no, you're all good, mate, not for you. He did 30 seconds. Yeah, I think he had the fourth most time-related penalties added ever to a car in a race. Maybe even the first. If that was F1 23, put it that way, I'd be disqualified because I've had too many penalties. I think over 30 they just disqualify you. So not quite Ocon, a bit too much. Further down the pecking order, Haas. Kind of their usual selves, really. Great in qualifying, awful in the race. They've got massive tyre wear problems. They just get those tyres heated up, which is brilliant. Great, you can start well, but you just keep degrading yourself backwards. And it's not quite working for them so far. They're a weird team, Haas, actually, because they do so much in terms of upgrading, starting off well to a season. But when it comes to putting on big developments for the season, they never do it. And they've got, obviously, a sponsor now with MoneyGram, where they are allowed to work to the budget cap. That's great, so why aren't you? I don't quite... Obviously, I get it. Look, infrastructure is key. You need good infrastructure. James Vowles has pointed on this with Williams, but look at Williams. I mean, this weekend, Williams weren't that great this weekend. They were a bit off the pace, not enough for the points. But Alex, that Williams car, in terms of upgrades built to it, has been substantial on that car. They've put loads into it with their whole new side pods, their new floor... their new, they would have done loads to that car. The engine covers changed, there's loads done to that, but Haas never really do that. They never really, the only visual change that Haas has made to that car for what I can see anyway, from the start of the season till now, is copied Ferrari's old front wing version. Because, of course, Ferrari, that's the upgrade they brought to Austria. It was the new front wing that they brought. But that's what I mean. All they've done is basically copied Ferrari's technically failed front wing because it didn't work for them. They had to change it. They knew it was a problem. So why are we all of a sudden now changing that element and having something that doesn't even work on a Ferrari work on our car? I know, again, look, they've got close ties with Ferrari, so if they're going to do upgrades, they've got to get them as close to copycat version of the Ferrari, but it didn't work, and it was quite poor for them. AlphaTauri, well, they're kind of nowhere really. De Vries and Tsunoda. I'm still really quite miffed that De Vries is being put under so much heavy pressure by Red Bull and AlphaTauri. Don't get me wrong, he's not doing a brilliant job, let's face it, but I would probably say the AlphaTauri is, on paper, in terms of average, the slowest car on the grid. And De Vries, again, he's never raced in Formula 1 in a full season before. And granted, he's going up against Yuki Tsunoda, and I think the problem here is Tsunoda isn't a very good driver in himself, so then when you see someone like De Vries coming in and he's even worse than Tsunoda, you get the feeling like, what's the point in having this guy in my team if someone like Tsunoda can smash him? But you've got to remember, Tsunoda's been in the sport now this is his third season in Formula 1. So he's had time to make his mistakes, make his crashes, be slow. You know, there was never any pressure on Yuki Tsunoda well, there was a little bit, but everyone was saying Yuki Tsunoda just needs to go. Because in 2021 in particular, when Gasly was on fire, like Gasly was probably his best season in Formula 1 was 2021. You know, he was absolutely crushing the competition and the midfield pack around him. Tsunoda was constantly going out in Q1. He was constantly crashing. He wasn't really scoring that many points. And apart from his debut, which was great, hey, funny that, Nick De Vries had a great debut as well, didn't he? I did. I remember that too. This is why it just annoys me. I could make a rant for ages about De Vries and how I'm upset that he is in the position he's in. Will they replace him with Liam Lawson? Genuinely, after the summer break at Zandvoort, that's probably not the smartest place to do it because it is the Dutch Grand Prix and De Vries is Dutch, but it's Red Bull. They couldn't care less. So, you know, they dropped Kvyat from their team after 4 races. And he didn't even do that bad. I'm pretty sure he got a podium in the Chinese Grand Prix, if I'm correct in saying. Yeah, he did, because Vettel shouted at him in the cool-down room. So, what's your problem with that? I say 4 races. He was actually there for 2015, but that car was an awful car. What else teams have I missed? Alfa Romeo. Guan Yu Zhou. It was a very good boy. One of only 2 drivers not to get a single warning for track limits. That was him and George Russell on that occasion. So fair play to Zhou. But apart from that, quite quiet and quite irrelevant, really. And of course, we briefly touched on Williams with their poor weekend. If I've missed anybody else, my due apologies for that one. But now, we're moving on this weekend to the British Grand Prix. What do I think is going to happen? Red Bull will win. There's no, I'm sorry. Like, it is frustrating when you're a Formula 1 fan to know that the next race that's coming up, you just know it's going to win Red Bull, unless it's a reliability fault. And that's the problem. You have to create the hype to hope that something would happen. But yeah, Red Bull are going to win. Verstappen has had very bad luck at Silverstone, so hopefully that continues. You know, in 2016, I mean, Mercedes were quickest anyway. 2017, the Red Bull wasn't the quickest anyway. 2018, the Red Bull wasn't the quickest anyway, and he had a DNF regardless. 2019, Vettel decided to do him up the bunda. 2020, well, actually, no, he has won at Silverstone. I thought he hadn't. No, he won in the 70th anniversary Grand Prix, didn't he? I thought Verstappen had never won at Silverstone before. I forgot about that. And then obviously 21, Lewis Hamilton smashed him off the track, which was funny. I'm joking. And then in 22, he had the piece of AlphaTauri that went into his car and stuck there. And that cost him a lot of time. Cost him the race, really. So what do I think? Well, I think Red Bull will win. What will be interesting is behind McLaren. Do they have the momentum? And will obviously the upgrades work for Piastri? Can they keep the momentum going? Can Ferrari keep the momentum going? Will Mercedes and Aston Martin bounce back? Both of them have got upgrades on the way. I don't know how significant Aston Martin's are. I know Mercedes is a massive upgrade that's coming. Maybe even more visually impairing than the Monaco upgrade, which would be surprising because the biggest upgrade of the season was Mercedes putting side pods on the car. But you never know. So we'll have to wait and see. I think, in my personal opinion, I think Aston Martin and Mercedes will catch up to Ferrari. But the most important thing is coming from Pirelli, because of course this weekend, Pirelli are introducing their brand new type of tyre, which of course is more reinforced than the ones that we've been using. That might change the order up, and especially for those that suffer with front limited tyre wear, they're the ones that we believe will benefit more, and that is from Ferrari and Aston Martin. Mercedes are more rear tyre wear limited, but if the tyres are reinforced front and rear, it might just actually help the rear tyres more. And you never know, it might switch up the order a little bit. Not too much, but a little bit. But we saw in the 2013 season, if you remember, if you were old enough to watch Formula 1 back then, there was a tyres compound that changed late in the midway through the season, and that's when Red Bull then had the most dominant car throughout the end of that season. So we might see the same thing. But guys, that is it for my F1 debate here for the Austrian Grand Prix. If you guys have enjoyed it, drop it a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here as well. And like I said before, thank you so much for all the support that you showed on the previous F1 debate. Whether this one gets the same amount of viewership and support, I don't know, because I wasn't expecting it to do so well the last time. But the comment section, like I've said before in this video, is your oyster. I've voiced my opinions via a video. You've got the comment section to put your opinions down below. Feel free to agree, disagree with me, or comment with your own points and let me know what you think. But for now, guys, I'm out of here. Take care all. Peace.